Thank you for joining us for this public program hosted by Flinders University Museum of Art on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. I want to take this opportunity to pay my respects to Kaurna elders past, present and emerging. And I also want to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples nationwide in the knowledge that their lands and waters were never ceded. My name is Fiona Salmon, Director of Flinders University Museum of Art, or FUMA, and I'm delighted to be joined online by distinguished Aranda and Kalkadoon curator Hetti Perkins and Kokatha Nukunu artist Yhonnie Scarce to discuss Looking Glass, a major touring exhibition brought together by Hetti and featuring the work of Yhonnie and Waanyi artist Judy Watson, who's unable to join us today. The exhibition was developed by TarraWarra Museum of Art, located in Melbourne, and contemporary art space Ikon, which is in Birmingham, and is currently travelling nationally with Nets Victoria. FUMA is honoured to be hosting the exhibition in Adelaide and really delighted to be presenting this event today. So I want to take this moment to thank you, Yhonnie and Hetti, for joining us. I know you're both busy, but I'm very much looking forward to the conversation with you. So to kick off, just a couple of slides of the show as we've installed it in Adelaide. And I suppose I wanted to ask you first, Hetti, as a curator with many, many years experience, both nationally and internationally, including 13 years at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, can you tell us a little bit about the motivations for this exhibition? Why did you draw these artists into the same space?
Thanks, Fiona, and let me also acknowledge the Kaurna people, on whose beautiful country this exhibition takes place. And I might take a second to also acknowledge the Woiwurrung people of the Wurundjeri Nation, the Kulin Nations, who, of course, hosted the exhibition at TarraWarra Museum, and, of course, Yhonnie's people, and how delighted I am to be here with you all, and to everyone that's tuned in today. Thanks also for joining us on whichever country you are. I'm on Gadigal, Wangul countries here in the place now known as Sydney. Look, it was a really exciting opportunity to work with TarraWarra again. I curated a few years ago an exhibition called Earth and Sky with John Mawinjul and Gulumbu Yunupingu, and that was a really wonderful opportunity to look at the works of those two artists and how, even though they're from, quite different backgrounds, how their works relate and how there are these universal messages, if you like, that come through their work that really speak to us about the lives and the aspirations and the cultures and the creativity, if you like, about people here in Australia and Torres Strait, and how we are united in so many ways. And that was something that I felt drawing out, particularly in the TarraWarra space. It's such a beautiful gallery that really suits that kind of conversation, if you like, between two people. Mm-hmm. And I was really delighted to have the opportunity to think about another conversation that could happen in that space. And I really felt that there was such a beautiful synergy between Yhonnie's work and Judy's work, and again, these kind of universal truths that they speak, that they give to us, but from often quite different, different country and sort of different ways of expressing it, of course, through the mediums they use. But as I said, it's been interesting to see how kind of right, if you like, the connection between them is as it evolves, as it comes to you, in the exhibition. You go, oh, it's almost like it. I always think that these kinds of things tend to curate themselves. And really all we're doing is, turning on the lights and opening the doors and vacuuming the floor, and the artwork and the artists do the rest. So
I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about in terms of mounting the show in our space, which is obviously much smaller than the TarraWarra, beautiful TarraWarra Museum. you know, and I thought, oh gosh, that we're really going to those conversations or the works are going to rub up very close with each other. And I was just curious as how that would look and feel. But I have to say, it's just so magical with the like you say, that combination of work is magical, and it kind of curates itself. One of the things that you write about in the catalogue, and I just love this phrase, you say that it's a fantastic alchemy of elemental materiality of earth, water, fire, and air. Is that you know, something that came to you sort of initially, or came to you as you were you know, thinking about the materiality particularly? Tell us a little bit more about that idea.
Yeah, sure. The idea sort of first came up in conversation with Jonathan Watkins, who's the director of Ikon Gallery in Birmingham. He wanted to work in partnership with TarraWarra to present a show over in the UK, and something it sort of started out with being the work of, you know, one artist. And I really felt that that was a fantastic opportunity, and I felt it was very important to have a living artist, you know, in that space. But also, as I sort of, we were talking about a painter initially, and so I was thinking of Judy, but I've always really felt that in some ways the kind of light that comes out of Judy's work, you know, the pigments that she uses, the water, also the very tactile, visceral process that she uses to make her work. You know, literally, if you've seen her in action, she's getting in there. She's got scrubbing brushes. You know, she's having what looks like a fantastic time. Actually,
It's a
it
whole
doesn't look like hard work.
experience, a whole of body, yeah.
Yeah, whole of body. And then it really struck me that, and of course, underpinning all of that is her very deep love of country and respect for country, and her heartache. I think her works come across sometimes to me as very melancholic works. You know, there's a sense of real heartache at what's happening to our country. And so really it was just like Yhonnie's work just came right into that frame of where I was thinking, where I was sort of going. And I felt that, again, it would be really wonderful particularly for UK audience, to have not only to see Yhonnie's work, and I know you're here, Yhonnie, I know you're in the room, but to see your work, Yhonnie, in terms of the, you know, materials you bring together, that wonderful alchemy that happens in your work, and also thinking about watching you in the hot shop, if that's what it's called, right, where and, you know, again, the physical nature of the work that you do, but also that, you know, the work, particularly with the Maralinga works, well, all of the works, but Maralinga is a very obvious and particularly sort of poignant example of what has happened in this country, amongst many things, as a direct result of, you know, sort of British imperialism. And so that was something that really struck a chord as being a very relevant story to bring back to the UK, and basically back to sort of, you know, sort of, I guess, drop it at their feet almost. That's and say, this is what's happening in our country. And yeah, so I think it was also not only that kind of alchemy of materials, but one of the things Judy often talks about in her work, and has expressed in her work, is this idea of string making.
Yeah.
You know, and there's these different strands or different threads coming together and making this beautiful sort of unraveling or raveling of a story. And I think that's something that you know, is very strong. It's a very strong part of this exhibition, how beautifully and comfortably, without losing any of its dynamism, Judy and Yhonnie's works come together, so they can be in these, you know, all these different spaces. There's just such a beautiful synergy and alchemy between them that it's really a wonderful, you know, a beautiful conversation that can be quite an intimate conversation, or it can be something that is, you know, for a bigger audience.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that is you know, taking those stories back to the UK, you know, taking them back to England, so critical, so important. But while we've got the focus a little bit on Yhonnie, I wanted to bring you in. we obviously know and love your work in Adelaide. You trained in Adelaide, and have just gone on to do amazing things, developing a really incredible interdisciplinary practice, as Hetti has already alluded to, that, explores the political realm, historical realm, and you use obviously the aesthetic qualities of glass to exploit that, if you like. And in the current show, we see it manifesting in the body of work that speaks to that history of Maralinga that Hetti has already mentioned. The bomb tests, of course, that took place between 1956 and 1963 on the lands of your peoples. I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about that in some further detail, and perhaps with reference to Hollowing Earth, which is the work that we can see sort of in the centre of the gallery or in detail on the slide now.
Yeah, I think definitely the works that are in Looking Glass are a direct reference to the nuclear tests that happened in South Australia, and it was really important, I think, that for the show when it was travelling, that it was to have these works. Hetti and I talked about it a lot too, in terms of the nuclear tests and that history of South Australia, and not a lot of people knowing about these nuclear tests as well. So I guess with Hollowing Earth, that was created for TarraWarra a number of years ago for Climb Art Festival, and it was exhibited in the North Gallery where Cloud Chamber, the new work that I created for Looking Glass, was situated. So for me, it was that particular work was again going back to history, I guess, and talking about the Olympic Dam uranium mine on my country up near Woomera, and Woomera being my birthplace as well. So I think it was an interesting work to create, actually, in thinking about growing up with that knowledge that uranium is always and has to be left in the ground because it does make people sick. And it's one of the materials, or it is the main material to create nuclear energy. So Hollowing Earth, I think when I was thinking about it, when I was making that work, by then I'd already sort of had started creating other works related to the nuclear test. So it was something that was important for me to think about the sickness that it creates as well.
So maybe I think that comes through very strongly, the illness and those lasting impacts across generation. We've got another close up of fallout babies, and I think that is just so moving and harrowing, that work. Well, all of the work is, but this one in particular, it has such a strong presence, certainly in our space. So this is obviously exploring in more detail the impact of the tests on not just land but on people.
And I think the fallout babies and was I guess the story behind a lot of Aboriginal children, but also non-Aboriginal children affected by the nuclear tests in the 1950s and early 60s. So it was interesting because I didn't really think about it much in terms of my birthplace of Woomera. And until I started researching, as you would know, that the nuclear tests, I guess, too, there's so much that we are yet to find out or uncover. So I've we'll continue to dig at it, I guess. And so one of those stories was the cemetery in Woomera, and I'd been going back for a number of years to, I guess, rediscover my birthplace or look at the history of Woomera itself, because the prohibited zone, you know, is still very much an active place, and it's still a long-range weapons testing place as well. So and so there's a cemetery out there that has primarily children buried. And sometimes I think maybe they're not buried as well, because they're not there anymore, because there's documentation that you can find in some places of the testing that they did on children or on their bones, or the deceased babies as well, that you know, they were looking for strontium 90, which is the after effect, as I would call it, in their bones from drinking their mother's milk or being born with radioactive poisoning and things like that too. So this is sort of the I guess the memorial to those little ones, as I call them. I call them my friends, because when I go to visit Woomera, and I've been there again this year, and probably will go back in the second half of this year, if and when COVID calms down a bit more. So it's something that's really important for me, because I think it wasn't their fault. And it was no one's fault, I think, besides the British government and Australian government testing on our country. And these little ones were the victims of these excruciating poisonous material, I think.
You mentioned the work memorial there, Yhonnie. You've just co-curated a show that we've seen in Adelaide as well with Lisa Radford, The Image is Not Nothing, Concrete Archives. And you were talking about, in relation to that show, you know, the research that you've done in Eastern Europe and elsewhere, looking at these kinds of memorials. Obviously, that's a strong theme in your work. I mean, do you think of your practice as a form of memorialization?
Yeah, I'd like to think that. I think because, yeah, for me, I think it's important to remember those people, like, or I guess, you know, Aboriginal people all over the country, but also my ancestors and my family. And for me, I think, yeah, it's about honouring those stories and honouring country and honouring our ancestors, because, you know, particularly I think about when they, you know, those who fought for country, and they fought hard, and we still do, like, we're still fighting for it, to protect our country, our language, and our young ones as well. So I think at the time when I went to art school, my nieces, I have, you know, 10 nieces and nephews, and they're all in their, you know, teens now. And I think my youngest nephew was 10, and I've got a niece who's 5. And I think it's a way for me to sort of keep those stories alive, and making sure that those kids, or the younger generation, are aware of what happened or continues, because it's still very present, I think. So I think, yeah, it's just a way of memorializing, but also documenting.
That's right.
Yeah, the documentation.
Yeah. And then I suppose I just wanted to ask about the material itself. I mean, Hetti, you mentioned before with Judy's work, you know, that's a very physical kind of experience. The making, she is kind of whole of body experience. But for you too, of course, Yhonnie, it's a deeply physical experience. You know, the glass blowing, that idea of being, you know, in the work. I suppose one of the responses to the exhibition that we've had here at Flinders has been from our humanities research group, and they've written a piece in response to the show, talking about this idea of a necessary collaboration between the artist and the materials. And I just wanted to ask you whether you think, Waanyi, or you would describe your relationship with glass as a kind of collaboration.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think it's yeah, you have to really, work hard for that material, for glass. And I would say that it's probably, collaboration is interesting because I see it as it makes me work hard for it. So, and I think you have to respect it. I think otherwise you burn yourself. Or
yeah, so you're in the fire with the.
Yeah. So it's sort of I think you have to know the material really well, I think, in order for it to work.
That's right.
And work well together. So I think definitely, I think it's something
some give and take, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit. I think I give a little bit more than I think that glass gives.
Yeah, maybe. So
maybe,
Hetti, what about just reflecting on Judy's work again? That idea of collaboration. Do you think that's a a useful term to use to describe Judy's approach to her work? I mean, it does feel as it is immersive in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think when Yhonnie was talking and thinking about her work in regards to that question, I mean, literally, of course, Yhonnie breathes life into the work. And I think in that same way, Judy, with her, literally her, well, I don't know about blood, but certainly sweat and possibly tears, become part of that work. And when she's talking about, in Judy's case, talking about the hair string objects that she's found in collections, which feature in the video work that's part of this exhibition particularly, she talks about the skin and not only the hair, of course, of people, potentially, ancestors of ours, but potentially her direct ancestors, and just like skin particles and things like that, how this kind of becomes the DNA, our DNA becomes part of these works. And I suppose that would apply, of course, to Yhonnie and also to Judy. So I see that as a very, they physically give themselves to the work, or share themselves with the work, I guess. But also I think there's a very strong, of course, spiritual, an intangible collaboration that comes through both of their works. In terms of, I think Judy's work particularly, it's represented very much by this kind of glowing light that, seems to appear within the work. And of course with Yhonnie's, the shapes are often very anthropomorphic, but also the shadows they cast really, give us a suggestion of ancestral presence or other presences that are something that I think the artist that's a part of the collaboration too. It's the artist collaborating with unseen forces and influences that they are able to channel as, Aboriginal people.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Of course, many of Judy's works in the exhibition were made in response to visits that she undertook to see those prehistoric sites in sort of England, Scotland and Ireland, including, the standing stones and the figures at Stonehenge, Avebury and the Outer Hebrides, I think also Orkney. You can see that in the image on screen, that sort of that ghostly sort of figure of the stone. But Yhonnie, you too undertook some research for your work in the United Kingdom in Birmingham. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I was invited to participate in a residency at with Ikon, which was postponed actually because of the pandemic. So we're hoping that we can reconvene or revisit that next year. So, but the idea of that research, and I started it, and I think it will always continue. I think because the information that's in the UK is I guess phenomenal, but it was. For me, it was looking back at where the nuclear energy sort of had begun, and I think that was, University of Birmingham has a lot to do with that. So I think there's two scientists, Frisch and Pirles, in I guess again collaboration with Mark Oliphant, who used to work at the University of Adelaide, funny enough, who developed this nuclear energy, I think. So they were doing a lot of tests in the physics department at the University of Birmingham. So there's so I guess I'm just only beginning to scratch the surface in terms of the history of those men. And so there's documents, I think, that of letters that they used to write to each other too. That's in Oxford, in one of the libraries there. And there's so there's a lot to uncover, I think. And so I think it's for me it's trying to find objects as well that they used to test with, and I did find a small cloud chamber, which was a little apparatus that they used to shoot air into, I think, to move nuclear or sort of uranium particles. So I'd like to go back again and look at more of their collection in terms of scientific apparatuses as well.
Yeah, I think well, obviously there's rich history there to tap into, and I think the works where you've brought in found objects, or I'm thinking here of those cribs in Fallout Babies. I mean, they're incredibly powerful elements to combine with the storytelling or the history telling that or the memorial making that you're achieving with the work. Hetti, I wanted to return to you, kind of in sort of pulling some of the threads together, and in a way we might have already touched on this, but in the catalogue, and I want to say it's just a terrific catalogue. It's a beautiful entry into the show. So thank you for producing that along with the exhibition itself. But in the catalogue, you write about the artists offering a sort of a panoptic and holistic portrait of country, where the creation and experience of art is mnemonic for the inherited, remembered and lived history of Aboriginal people. And then you go on to talk about, the enigmatic and often intimate forms, gestures and marks implying a sort of an immersive timelessness outside of a linear chronology. Is that sort of spirituality, that element of the spiritual that you're talking about here?
Yes, I'm just trying to remember now that essay that you read back to me. I'm like, what was I trying to say? No. No.
I just love this idea of this immersive timelessness, that sense that, it's anywhere and everywhere in a way.
Yes, I'm sort of. It is something that I am very struck by. I think that one of the things that is particularly relevant, I guess, to that question is like when talking to Yhonnie and talking to Judy about their works, the very powerful sense that you have of, or talking to many artists about these kind of works, and particularly about our Australia's past, if you like, is about how present that past is within our community still, and I guess in our bodies, and something that that emotion comes very easily and quickly to the surface. When you talk to Yhonnie about Maralinga and things that happened to her community, Canupa Mission and those kinds of places, and of course Judy as well, the kind of reckless destruction of the landscape, stolen generations, all of these terrible things that have happened about the past. And I guess the main point is that those things are still very much part of the present, and that's why I feel that it's important to understand that, and then to therefore understand, like when Waanyi talks about what you know, what you make the work for Yhonnie, this sort of sense of not so much memorialization, but kind of to it's for the future, you know, it's for the future generations. It's about, you know, being healed, you know, trying to heal communities. So it's not just like moving on or getting over it. It's about sort of, you know, understanding that past, accepting it, coming to terms with it. And part of that is to understand that it still very much is part of the present experience for our people. And like Yhonnie says, we're still fighting today. So I think that, yeah, that's a sort of, I guess, immersive experience that I think about, or I feel when I'm experiencing Judy and Yhonnie's work. And one of the reasons why many of the works by Judy in the exhibition are kind of, there's a lot of blue in that exhibition, is because for Judy, she says, you know, blue is the colour of memory. And so that's why it's got such an important sort of strand that works, you know, that it's such an important part of the work and the selection that is part of this exhibition, Looking Glass. But I also think in terms of that timelessness, it's sort of, it's a bit oblique, but I was thinking when Yhonnie was talking about her research at Birmingham and these kind of really unexpected connections and, you know, intersections, if you like, that have come to the fore within this exhibition, is that both Judy and Yhonnie have this kind of very forensic kind of process, and it's really looking at, you know, crimes that have been committed in this country, crimes against humanity and crimes against our country. And so the artists in that way become almost like, yeah, have this kind of very forensic role in, you know, uncovering that history and bringing it to light. And that's something I feel is very strongly, again, with that use of light in both of their works, it's about sort of shining a light on these histories and bringing them to the surface, but in ways that are very, you know, persuasive and beautiful, very evocative, but, you know, kind of there's a bit of a sting in the tail. And it reminds me of Judy's work, Resistance Pins, you know, where these very beautiful kind of seemingly harmless objects can in fact be used with deadly force by the right people. And of course, in this case, those right people being Judy and Yhonnie, to take those stories back, to lay this forensic evidence at the feet of, you know, the colonial empire, and to say, you know, this is what you've done, this is what you've done to our people. And I think that's something that is a very important message to go back to the UK, because those effects are still being felt today, you know, obviously. And that's something that I think that, you know, we shouldn't, it's a bit of a lest we forget moment.
Yeah, well, I think that's a beautiful, you know, thing to end on. I think it's important that the stories don't just go back to the UK, but of course that people here, non-Indigenous people here particularly, are engaging with those stories deeply. We've had a terrific response to the exhibition here in Adelaide. We've had a vast number of students through the show. You'll know that I'm really privileged here to work very closely with some terrific Indigenous colleagues, Nat Harkin, who opened the show, and other colleagues who've been using the show for teaching and learning, and it's having a profound impact on the way students are engaging with these histories and stories. So it's, you know, just a fantastic way to bring those stories into the kind of academic realm as well. So I want to thank you both for the work. I congratulate you. Just an amazing show. Congratulate you both, Judy as well. We're really deeply honoured to have the show here in Adelaide, and I want to thank you again for joining me today, for sharing your insights and just enriching our understandings of the work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's nice to talk to you.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.